Hi, everybody. I'm here with the author, Story of the Cosmos, Daniel Ray, and I'm really excited today because we're going to talk about street epistemology, and Dan has been investigating that for a while, and we're probably going to get into some approaches that we've seen people use. We'll define what street epistemology is and at least how Dan's definition of it, that sort of thing. So we'll take a look at that, and it's going to be pretty exciting. So at the very end of the show, Daniel, I should say, is going to offer a couple of free books to a couple of lucky people. And so that's something that he's going to do. So here's the book. I've got it too. It's really neat when you have a signed book. And so this is it's called Story of the Cosmos. You guys are going to want to pick it up. How the Heavens Declare the Glory of God. It's the general editors are Paul Gould and Daniel Ray, and it includes articles from people like William Lane Craig and Sarah Salviander. And so it's pretty exciting. So without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce Daniel to you. Or let Daniel introduce himself, I should say.
How are y'all?
Hi. Yeah.
Well, thanks for having me on, Stephanie. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. So I found you on Twitter initially a long time ago. And one of the things that I noticed about you on Twitter is that you're very much of a very kind person towards other people. And sometimes you would go in and introduce yourself to kind of harsh responders to some of the tweets that I would put out. And you'd say, hi, I'm Daniel. And then you two would get into a conversation and you would try to bring people the message of Jesus. And I thought that was really awesome. And then I got to read your book, and I think this is fantastic. I'd love to promote it. But let's look at the topic at hand. We're going to talk about street epistemology. So Daniel, can you tell us a little about what that is and where we've seen it?
Absolutely. We were talking about how we go from cosmos to epistemology, but the God that we serve is called the Logos in John's Gospel. He is the Word made flesh, and so sorry about that on my phone. He's the Word made flesh, and he spoke things into existence. And if you're a student of C.S. Lewis, or if you're into any Christian apologetics, or you are attempting to articulate and defend your faith, you will use words, and you will try to use words carefully. I mean, the Bible is filled with exhortations, wisdom in choosing our words. And so the cosmos has within it, the created fabric of the cosmos has within it the grain of divine language that, like a highway that God speaks and his directives go in a certain way. And if you're going against that grain, if you get on the highway and go in the wrong direction, you might get somewhere, but it's going to cause a lot of problems if you're trying to go against the grain of the highway. And so the whole world is oriented toward divine language and divine speech and reality set up in accordance with how God has spoken things. And of course, he's spoken through nature, and then he's spoken through his word. So the idea of epistemology, how we know what we know, knowledge is entirely related to philosophy. Philosophy is the discipline of, philo and sophia, the love of wisdom. And so what is wisdom? The Bible says the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So it's essential for Christians to understand how word-oriented we are. We should all be good philologists. We should all love words and choose our words carefully. And that includes science, philosophy, history, whatever, even in conversation on Twitter. That's where it helps me practice, using my speech with salt, as Jesus says. And so it's important to understand that this isn't just some sort of detached reality, something detached from reality, but in fact, it is a deliberate use of speech for something that is counterproductive or counter to what God has established. And so street epistemology began with philosopher and atheist Peter Boghossian. In 2013, he wrote a book called A Manual for Creating Atheists. And it was on the tail end of the whole new atheist movement. He wasn't one of the four horsemen, maybe a troop on a horse, but he was certainly advocating that same kind of aggressive atheism in that. And his whole take was, instead of arguing with Christians about the particulars of the faith, apologetics and script reliability of the Gospels, cosmological, philosophical arguments for God's existence, instead of doing all that, forget all that. Let's not argue facts. And that's in the book. That's in both books he's written. We'll get to the other one in a minute. But instead of doing apologetics, trying to do counter apologetics, trying to answer a Christian on certain defenses of faith, He said, forget all that, set all that aside, and ask the Christian how they know what they know, and go down what he's termed the epistemological route. So it's kind of a combination of a Socratic method, philosophy, the theory of knowledge, how we know what we know, used for the purpose, Stephanie, of trying to get Christians to doubt. That's how it began. And that was going on 8 years ago. And it has, Peter is no longer intently involved with street epistemology. He's written another book in 2019 with James Lindsay called How to Have Impossible Conversations, where it doesn't really talk about street epistemology, but that whole thing is still there under the term of interventionist. Whether you're an epistemologist or an interventionist, your idea is cognitive intervention. You have the tools to go help people discover how bad their thinking is. And so now, 8 years later, there's a host of people on YouTube and on social media. Because of COVID this has become more of a popular thing on social media. There's a website, but there's all kinds of content creators on YouTube and other places doing street epistemology, using these basic question and answer techniques to try to cause doubt in people's beliefs. And this is expanded beyond religion now. People use it for politics and cults and alternative medicines and anything else you can imagine. There's a wide variety of topics, but really, I think the money videos for the street epistemologist and underlying street epistemologists is the same goal that it was 8 years ago, causing doubt in faith of believers, specifically Christian.
Yeah. And I like how you pointed out a lot of really good points. And one of the things that you said that I want to kind of build on a little bit is this idea of, and I want to go talk about Peter Boghossian's book too, because I haven't read that book. And so we can get into that a little bit more as well. But I wanted to talk about when you said people going against the current, and it's this idea of trying to swim against the current. I want to point two things out. One is when my sister was pretty young, she got caught up in a rip current. We live in Florida, as you know, and so she got caught up in a rip current, and a miracle occurred. She heard a voice of a woman telling her not to swim against the current. And so she didn't, and she ended up doing fine. She was able to escape that rip current that was pulling her down.
Wow.
And there was no woman around. There was nobody around. So this is the kind of crazy thing. So that's an interesting thing, but it's kind of a life thing too, because I was just listening to Jordan Peterson on his in one of his maps of meaning sort of thing, and he was talking about Cain and Abel and about how Cain kind of went against God. And as you go against God, you develop this anger and this sense of vengeance. And so he started looking at Abel, thinking to himself, Abel is just so perfect and everything that Cain wasn't, and he had God's favor. And so he decided he was going to go after Abel and eventually killed Abel. And it's kind of an interesting thing when you see that online, when you're trying to go out there and share the good news in a positive way. And these people are looking at you like, wait a second, this may be a God's favored. I'm going to therefore go after that person and try to make them look really bad or do something like that. And so I kind of relate that.
Yeah.
But so I'm just wondering, and so I think that you defined street epistemology very well as far as how people come to the idea. And I've run into some other ones, like I'll just name Anthony Magnabusco and Pine Creek Doug. I don't know if you've had interactions with either of those two, but or even Peter Boghossian. Have you actually interacted with any of them?
I have interacted with Anthony Magnabusco. I've interacted with Pine Creek Doug. I've interacted with Reed Nicewonder, who is Cordial Curiosity, a couple of others. I've made 3 videos on street epistemology. I've been doing research on this topic indirectly for years, but more formally in the last couple of months for my job at Watchman Fellowship. We've done a 4-page profile on Peter Boghossian. And I say profile, we write these 4-page essays that come out on these topics of ideas in other world religions. So we did one on Peter, and we did one on the combined Peter and street epistemology. So I really heavily engaged. I made some videos. I reviewed the books. I reviewed the tactics, and 2 of the videos got picked up by the street epistemology website, YouTube channel. 4 or 5 of them, including Anthony and Reed and Doug, reviewed the videos. And they were pretty favorable about it. I tried to give it a fair treatment. Obviously, I'm a Christian apologist professionally. Obviously, there are disagreements on the worldview level of the intent of street epistemology. But in the videos, I applauded what I thought was good about what they're trying to do. But I also said, you need to be aware of people who use street epistemology for the specific intention of trying to get you to doubt your faith. And so they were pretty civil and pretty cordial. And as I've clarified many times, most of my engagements with street epistemologists begin very civilly. I mean, you extend that civility, it's going to get you a longer way. Now, some of them have deteriorated into downright nastiness, and especially that's more prone to happen on Twitter and Facebook because you're not face to face. Less likely to happen in a video when you're live. Even less likely to happen. I will say this in defense of street epistemologists: the kinds of nasty exchanges that I've had with some of them that practice this have all Twitter. And likely, and I think Anthony even said this himself in one of the videos that he reviewed of mine, likely that would never have happened if we were in person. And I agree. So I will say that there's genuine, even with Anthony, I would say there's genuine delight and sincerity in wanting to keep difficult conversations civil. I think that's great. Where we obviously differ, and this is where, it's individual to individual. Why are you asking me about my confidence level and my belief in God? What is the point of that? Why are you doing that? Do you want to help me be more confident, or are you trying to lower my confidence? There's an old Saturday Night Live skit way back in Desert Storm days, where there was a reporter. It was a cold opening, as they do. Chris Farley's era. And they were having a press conference on the war in the assault in Iran and that whole thing. And Chris Farley was a mocking reporter, in a Chris Farley fashion. He goes, "What would lower the morale of our fighting soldiers?" And that's kind of like what street epistemology is for a lot of people. What would lower your confidence in the one most important thing in your life? And they go after that. Now, some of them, I think, really think they're helping you. Some of them really think, hey, I want you to examine your cognitive structures, and I want you to have good tools. And I think I have some good tools. Let me share them with you. I think some of them do that. Now, one of the videos I made, I picked out a street epistemologist guy. That was not his intent. His intent was to destroy, I think dismantle was his actual word, to destroy the Christian, invite him into a friendly conversation on a video he agreed to, and then turn around and use that video to embarrass him. That's dishonest. I don't particularly like that. And I think there's even some skeptics and atheists who are kind of asking the questions of whether or not that's even ethical, to lure somebody into a conversation under the pretense of a friendly chat, just want to chat. And then actually it's really going to be turned around and, utilized to make them look bad or to try to reduce their confidence in their belief in God. So like with anything, Stephanie, there are so many people practicing this. It's really hard to put a finger on how, everybody does it. But primarily, it remains a skeptical phenomena. It is within the skeptic community. It is every street epistemologist I've ever engaged is an atheist, but not every atheist practices street epistemology. But it remains a skeptical endeavor. And I know Anthony Magnabosco wants to sort of shed the he said he's wanted to shed the atheist mantra, and he hopes everybody uses street epistemology. And to some degree, it's the Socratic method of questioning. How do you know that? Stuff we all say, but what makes it street epistemology versus just having a conversation? That's the question that you need to ask when you're engaged with these things. What's the point of this?
Yeah. And I think that, it's funny because I went on Pine Creek Doug's channel and he did that on me. And so he was saying, how confident are you in your belief in God? How confident are you that Jesus was resurrected and all that kind of stuff? And and then I went on another channel, Nathan Orman's channel, and Pine Creek was there again. And he asked me again. And both, I don't remember what I said the first time. I should have said 100%. I said it the second time, though. Just recently, I said 100%. And he did not like that. He's like, you can't say 100%. I'm like, actually, no, I actually am 100% sure. I'm not going to go back on that. Jesus has made himself very obvious to me in a number of different ways. And because of that, I would be completely dishonest to deny it. And he did not like that. It's like, because this isn't a math game. This isn't statistics. I'm looking at probabilities and you say it's 100% probable. You can't say that. This isn't statistics. This is my confidence level in God. And I'm there. And so that bugs the street epistemologist. So,
well, and too, SJ, the thing I say that first of all, if you've just met somebody, you're on an airplane or you're in a park and you're like, hey, you want to have a conversation? Anthony has his clipboard. He's very personal. I mean, they're good at what they do in talking to people. Christians could learn some personal skills from watching how they interact with strangers. And I've actually learned some things watching them engage total strangers. That's been very helpful. And they're pretty good at it. I will concede when I see something done well, I'll concede that. But what we're really addressing here is that Boghossian's 2013 intentions are right there underneath the surface for a majority of people that are practicing street epistemology. And their number one target generally still seems to be, 8 years later, after all the street epistemology stuff has grown and grown and grown, their target still seems to be this idea of faith. They just want to continue to blast that. And there's two things. There's a problem here, SJ, because in one sense, Boghossian defines faith as belief without evidence. Now, he was on Unbelievable with Justin Brierley back in 2013 with professional Christian philosopher Tim McGrew, who held Peter's feet to the fire and said, Peter, no Orthodox theologian within the Christian tradition who thinks seriously about philosophy of religion ever uses that as a definition of faith. Yeah. That's true. I mean, it's not a definition. I mean, Peter must have come up with that autodidactically. Well, he sort of did, because here's the rub. Christians do use that definition like that. They say, when questioned, if they don't have the repertoire of what counts as, or what gives them a solid foundation for why they believe what they believe, they just kind of throw up their hands and go, it's faith. To mean, they may not define it exactly as Peter does, but basically what that is, it's a bailout. I don't have anything else. It's just faith. And so that's how people they talk to use the word. And so it really is street epistemology for a lot of people. It's like, okay, I used to teach middle school. I'm not going to go into my middle school class and exploit 12-year-olds, because that would be illegal, but exploit their ignorance. I'm there to fix that and to help them to think critically. I'm not going to go down on them. Now, if they think they own the world and they know everything, then I might have to exploit their ignorance a little bit. But it seems to me that a lot of people practice street epistemology to exploit the weakness, the intellectual weaknesses, the philosophical weaknesses that each of us have. And I'm not saying that I'm a smart Christian and I have all the answers. You ask me, talk to me long enough, you're going to find some weaknesses in my knowledge about what I know. I mean, we just talked to Craig Keener on our book club last night. My gosh, I don't feel like I've done anything after listening to Keener's resume. He's the one that did the Miracles book and the volume of the giant book on Acts. Well, we've had so Dr. Keener is a walking encyclopedia, a truly humble man. But when you listen to all of his publications, you're like, man, I don't know anything. He's just quoting scripture like a machine. Anyway, all of us have weaknesses in our knowledge. All of us have gaps. That's why we need each other. That's why we are the body of Christ. A hand can't say to the foot, I don't need you. You know things I don't. I know things you don't, and so on. So our knowledge level is different. So I'm not up here pontificating saying, that I know everything and everybody else doesn't. But what street epistemology tends to do, and what it's capitalized on, are finding the weaknesses in Christians and exploiting them and putting them out on YouTube and whatnot. And this is very popular in the skeptic community, as you can imagine, getting a Christian idea to go, I don't know, and so that's, we need it's a matter of discipleship and really understanding the basics of our faith, which I think, we've been slipping in that as the church. So there's a lot of rudimentary Christians out there. I'm not saying they're not Christians, who just don't have that basic grasp. And so, nobody's ready going for a walk on a Saturday or walking through campus. Nobody's ready to have a sit down, deep philosophical discussion with a skeptic. I mean, you think about it, that's really what's happening on a sub level there. And so, for me, when I go into those discussions, I prepare. And so, we have to be prepared to give a defense. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of street epistemologists are taking advantage of our unpreparedness, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And I like your little reference to 1 Peter 3:15. That's definitely important for us to do. But yeah, this whole thing with, let me ask you this. what do you think about the intent? Like, why is Peter Boghossian putting out books, and one of the books is How to Create Atheists? Why do atheists want to create other atheists when atheism itself offers people no eternal hope, no meaning, no purpose? It in its logical conclusion comes up to nihilism. And so why would these people want to try to get converts? What is the reason? What do you think? I have my thoughts.
Sure. Boghossian, before the book came out, his first book came out, he did a lecture called Jesus, the Easter Bunny, and Other Unbelievable Things, or something like that, at Portland State University in 2012. And in that, I mean, it's been seen several thousand times, he defines faith as a mental disorder. And then he goes on a little bit and says that he'd like to see the Diagnostic Statistical Manual remove religious exemptions from mental disorders. Very clear about it, not being cheeky.
Wow.
I don't know in 8 years if he shared in that thinking, but that was Peter Boghossian 8 years ago. So Charity, maybe he's scaled back on that. I don't know. And another thing too, if you encounter a street epistemologist today, say somebody's in his mid-20s or 30s, maybe they've never even read Peter Boghossian's book. Maybe and some of them I've talked to, SJ, don't even know Peter had ever said that. So it's not like street epistemologists are walking around with a manual for creating atheists in their back pocket. However, that book is still a reference on streetepistemology.com. If you want to know more about street epistemology, here's a link to this book on Amazon. So it's still there. And I don't know, it's atheist to atheist who's practicing this, how deeply they agree with him. But I think they all agree that faith is not a reliable way to know something. Of course, that's a twist of the definition of faith too. They're just going on other people's definitions of faith. But I think it was Anthony Magnabosco just last month at the Black Non-Believers Conference, their 10th anniversary. They had Anthony come and speak, and I watched his video. And he had said that when he encounters this, because he got a question, or it comes up a lot when he talks to theists. Well, what do I do if I give up my faith? If I'm ready to sort of go where you seem to be leading me, what do I do? He hands him a card. I will grant it to Anthony that he's willing to have follow-up with people he talks to. I don't know of a lot of street epistemologists that do that, but Anthony does it. But what do you think he offers them when they express that? Is the atheist community. I mean, that's the community that he offers to people that are sitting on the fence or thinking about leaving religion. On the one hand, I'm glad that there are people there's a support group for people that are coming out of the church. Our ministry runs a Mormons in Transition. We haven't met because of COVID, but we have Mormons come in for lunch once a month, and maybe they're Christians, maybe they're ready to give up religion altogether because they just came out of the Mormon church. One thing they have all in common is they just came out of the Mormon church, but the other thing they have in common is most of them don't know what's next, So it's atheism. It's the assumption that faith is bad. And as I was talking about this, and we were doing research with my boss, James Walker, James said something that I think is spot on as an analogy for the way a lot of people practice street epistemology. And I have to be careful with this because I've learned that everybody practices this a little different, and one guy's malicious intent may not be the other guy's intent. So you kind of have to watch it and not say that every street epistemologist is doing X, Y, and Z, because every one of them don't. I met one who just kind of uses it for political things. He doesn't really go into the religious part of it. And he likes he likes the idea that the civility is the thing. And so he's not really into like putting people's religion down or whatever. But so one of the things that's as you say, what are they offering people is atheism. And it's as we know, there's foundationally, there's no what do you ground logic in? What do you ground reason in? What's the point of a community of people engaged with? We have a lady, I think it's a lady. We have one of our atheist members of the Atheist and Christian Book Club who said to James recently, he or she said, I have more in common with the Christians except for God's existence. And I don't have anything in common with the atheist except that God doesn't exist. That was her comment. And so it's like, I'm in between two worlds, but she loves the book club. I say she, I don't know who it is or not. But James, getting back to my analogy, James said this to me, and I think this is kind of how a lot of street epistemologists epistemologists approach this. Let's assume you go out with your camera and your clipboard and you want to talk to married couples, right? And your presupposition, and there is, I would say for a lot of people, this idea that faith is bad is a presupposition. There's no, in the literature, SJ, there's nothing that justifies this assumption, except
that's actually a really good point.
Explaining of that. Yeah, there's no defense or justification, just the assumption that this idea that faith is bad is the a priori foundation for why we're out there doing that faith is bad, faith is bad, faith is bad. We're going to go out and talk to people who have faith and we're going to blast them with it. James said, imagine this. Imagine somebody who goes to married retreats and stands outside in the parking lot and says, hey, I'm Jim. I want to have a conversation about marital relationships. I'm doing a survey. Okay, I have 5 minutes, chat. Took the clock on. What's the confidence that you have that both of you are faithful to one another? And so the presupposition is that all married couples are in adulterous relationships. They just don't know. And so they go out and they assume this presupposition, and they go to every married couple they talk to, they put that little seed of doubt that your spouse is being unfaithful. What would reduce your confidence in the level of love that it has for you? And, pretty soon at the end after 5 minutes, you're like, I need to go get a private investigator. It's that kind of thing, SJ, for a lot of people, especially Christians that are caught off guard by this. The presupposition that just assaults you is the idea that faith is bad.
That's actually a really good point.
I mean, you can't.
No,
you can't make a community out of that, though.
I had somebody tell me, I want to say your point. I just want to repeat this idea, but for example, you always have to look for the hidden assumptions. And I think that's just like what you're pointing out right there. It's that saying faith is bad, because the other one is, I've had people tell me that now I've got this protected Twitter account that I've got my own little echo chamber. I'm like, well, the assumption is an echo chamber is bad. I mean, what if, to me, I like this little, I like the feedback that I get on my Twitter account now. I like the way that people are very, nice towards me. My idea is, the assumption is my other Twitter account, which was a complete festival of hatred in some cases towards me. I closed it, and I'm really happy about that. And so, but anyway, I want to ask Converse Contender's question, because he had to go, and he said he's going to come back and listen to this question. I think this is the one, because I couldn't find anything else in there. But he says, street epistemology seems like atheist precept. Could be wrong. Can you think of a naturalist explanation? Are you certain of that? So, is there a naturalist explanation for, I think that just is a question that's actually what they always do ask. Like, the assumption is that the naturalist is preferable to the supernatural explanation.
Right. And as philosopher Tim McGrew says, we're having Tim on the book club in March, along with atheist philosopher Graham Oppie. I was just reading Tim this morning, and yesterday I just interviewed Paul Gould, who is the co-editor of our book. Paul did a whole podcast on philosophy. But as Tim McGrew says, possibilities are cheap, SJ. In other words, the cash flow, it's easy to spend like monopoly money. The consequence of raising a possibility is easy, right? But we're not necessarily trading in what is possible. It's like saying some of these analogies that I've heard are it's like, well, if a purple dragon in a DeLorean time machine came from Jupiter and brought you textual evidence that Jesus was a cat, would that lower your confidence? It's like that took 30 seconds for somebody to come up with. And then they want to compare the purple dragon to God. And it's cheap. Analogously, there's nothing there. It's nothing. And so just saying that, well, this could you have a naturalistic explanation for something? Well, sure. I mean, but most people aren't scientists. But let's just take that. Let's just run with it and find where. Let's say there's two kinds of explanations for why there's coffee on my table. One is I could explain to you the biology of coffee beans. Maybe I'm not a biologist. Maybe I wouldn't even do that well. But the coffee is here because of the biology of beans, right? That's a natural explanation. But there's also a personal explanation, SJ, that no natural explanation can do away with. You can posit all the naturalism that you want to, that none of it rules out agency. In fact, so many naturalistic explanations actually assume that this is Darwin's metaphor, that agency is assumed in the stuff. He took human personality, a breeder, and shoved it in cells. And we just went, well, that's brilliant, But he took all the metaphors and language of natural selection are agency metaphors of breeders and sheep and intention and purpose and design and mechanism. And they shoved them into the coffee cup and said, look, the coffee has done it, right? They've used the language of anthropomorphic language to describe what's going on in the cell and describe what's going on in biology. And so it's like me saying, well, the biology of beans proves that baristas don't exist. I don't need baristas to explain the biology of beans. No, you don't. But if you're going to explain coffee, beans aren't enough. Beans don't make coffee. People do, right? So I don't care how far down the naturalistic tube you want to ride. You're not ruling out agency. Agency is still a prime. In fact, every naturalistic explanation I hear, it's so technical because the science has been so wonderfully discovery oriented in the last 100 years as our technology has improved. And the more we find, the more it looks like there's a barista making coffee. It's not just enough to say beans did it. The way naturalism is today, SJ, it's more like Jack and the Beanstalk than it is something in the Bible, because, Jack and his magic beans, he just throws them and then leaves them alone. And look what happens. He takes a tower to the sky and finds a giant and all this stuff. And so the presuppositions of naturalism, none of them rule out agency at all. So there's two legitimate explanations. You can now, if I'm a scientist and I just keep saying God did it, I'm not going to do very well, right? Because that's not the necessary explanation a science is looking for. A scientist wants to know what the biology of beans are. That's fine. But if I'm going to be a good scientist, I need to know the biology of beans. And God did it is not going to get me published in peer-reviewed papers. But my biology of beans doesn't rule out God did it. That's the thing there.
Yeah. So no, I agree with you.
Just to me, that naturally doesn't work.
Well, that's kind of like when you look at the conditions that the Earth is in, and the 10 habitable zones, like Hugh Ross has pointed out, and how it's the chances that life, advanced life as we see it, would be formed in a planet are extremely minuscule, to the point where people like Fred Hoyle said, well, it looks like somebody's been, monkeying with the situation here when he's looked up into the cosmos. And then you have this idea of looking even inside of our DNA, and you see these 3.5 billion well-ordered code, well-ordered nucleotides. And you say to yourself, okay, and it's spelled out like, it's like language. It's like a language. And you say to yourself, okay, are you really going to say that we have DNA code and there's no coder? I mean, I know that sounds really simplistic, but that's the thing that I think about. I'm not a scientist, not even close to it. But I mean, I just look at that and I feel like God's screaming at us through DNA.
Well, and two, here's another thing. I think we're talking about the right use of language. We started off talking about what is the grain of language into which we must find ourselves if we're going to go along with creation. We are linguistic, word-centered, ontological beings. God spoke us into existence and names things. We tell stories. Tolkien and Lewis were wordsmiths. Tolkien was fascinated by the words he saw on the sides of old trucks as a child growing up in England and Nova Scotia. I forgot. It's a wonderful story in his biography. But what's this, and this is Lewis's point, and this is one of our essays in The Story of the Cosmos, is Michael Ward's essay on C.S. Lewis's problem with the word space. Lewis hated that word nicely, but is that the right word for what's going on up there? And so what we have today, SJ, is language that describes us, beginning with maybe Newton. Once you start discovering the laws of gravity, astronomy moves from astrologos, astrology, to astronomos, law. Nomos is law, star law, versus all the other disciplines, biology, physiology, all these other ology things. Astronomy shifted from astrology to astronomy because two reasons. One, Newton's laws. They saw this mathematical resonance. Kepler and Bra before them, this mathematical resonance in the cosmos. And Melissa Cain Travis had a wonderful chapter on the mathematical resonance of God in the cosmos. But once those mathematical resonances were being discovered by Kepler and Tycho and Galileo, then we started talking about the laws, which made it star law, star nomos, and we started moving away from astrology, astrologos, because it had become astrology was astronomy, but it had become so befuddled with futuristic predictive nonsense that once the science started happening, but it kind of got thrown out with the baby with the bathwater. How did God? I would say that Newton came along with a razor blade and went and severed God from creation. Now God's just kind of going back here every once in a while, tweaking the mobile. A little tweak here, a little tweak there, but the numbers seem to be running themselves. Whereas before that time, God was intimately acquainted and intimately concerned and involved with his creation. So now the language that we have is machine-oriented. You think about what machines do. They're automated tellers, automated this, automated that, self-driving cars, self-checkouts. Did I lose you?
Oh, yeah, just for a second. Now you're back.
Okay, we're back.
You said self-checkouts was the last thing you said.
So,
and automation.
Yeah, the automation, we think of machines that do things by themselves, right? And so we have to be cognizant of, are we describing ourselves as machines too? Is the language that we're using, are we imbibing language that says that we're just self-autonomous machines? And there's a lot of literature out on this very thing, but we, being image bearers in God, imagio Dei, that the words in which we describe ourselves, we should be very carefully wedded to how God describes ourselves and not how science describes ourselves. There's nothing wrong to say that science discovers DNA, we have DNA, but it fits wonderfully with what the Psalm says, that God knit us together in our mother's womb.
Wonderfully,
and so
we
have to, What does this all have to do with epistemology? Well, it is, when you use it for atheism, it is inherently anti-Christ. And what do I mean by that? Sounds kind of harsh in my language, but I mean it this way. I mean it that Hebrews 12, that Jesus is the author and finisher of our faith. Faith is an action in light of what is already revealed. And so Jesus gives us this faith. We take that active step to do things. Hebrews 11 is filled with people who by faith did things, right? Abraham did this. Moses did that. These people did that. The Abel offered this. There's verbs involved with faith. Faith is a step of action in light of what is already known. And so when you go against faith, you go against the author of faith, who is Jesus himself. And so the way in which so many people use street epistemology cuts against not only who we are as human beings, not only against the created order itself, but against the author of everything and the author of faith. It really is at its core this severed kind of idea that philosophy is just this realm of thinking where I can shut off my brain to just think about things in the abstract without thinking about how they fit into the bigger whole. And so what's interesting, SJ, is one of the things in street epistemology right now, people are asking the ethical question. Is it right for you to go cause doubt in somebody else's belief that upholds their entire lives? Is that ethical to just go poke at somebody's belief, especially a young Christian whose entire life, mom, dad, college, friends, is it right to poke at that and go, are you sure? And some people will say, well, you Christians, you underline, you want to go after Mormons and all these other people. Don't you mess up their lives too? No, but the difference between Christianity and street epistemology is that street epistemology gives people doubt and stops there. Christianity offers people who I was just talking about, the Lord Jesus. Yeah. And in him is all the treasures and wisdom of knowledge, your purpose in life, the grain of reality, your ontological being, the right words, everything, redemption, community, everything is involved in who Jesus is and who we are in Christ in the body, 1 Corinthians 12. So they literally are trying to unravel that one thread that makes your whole shirt fall apart, right? They're pulling on that one keynote thread, and then for some people, they pull it and it unravels everything. But they're not around to sort of pick up the pieces, except come on into the atheist community. Yeah. You can't have a community around something like our friend at the book club what community do I have with people when I only have one thing in common, which is I don't think God exists? Everything else is up in the air. But how do you make a community of something that is negative? I don't believe in Santa Claus, but I don't join an anti-Santa Claus group. It's bankrupt, really. I mean, I don't mean to be harsh about that, but you're offering someone a negation. You're not offering something positive. You're giving people polemics. You're taking something from them, and in exchange, you're giving them a vacuity. This idea of just doubting for doubting's sake. J.P. Moreland writes about this, and so many other philosophers have written about this. If you're going to doubt, you need a standard of truth by which you are measuring all other claims. You can't just give somebody doubt and say, enjoy your doubt. Doubt is a virtue. Well, I should doubt that doubt is a virtue. I mean, how far down the doubt chain do we take that? So it's really a sort of a negation, Stephanie. That's really the underlying gist of a lot of what street epistemology is the negation of all that is good.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I want to build on some of the points that you made, because I think that you've made some really good points. And I took little notes here so I could not forget what I wanted to mention. But one of the things that you mentioned with faith is this idea that there are people out there, like you've said earlier, that are Christians who really haven't investigated their faith. And they're not, I mean, my husband's one of them. My husband hasn't done much investigation. He really isn't interested. He completely believes in Jesus, and he doesn't want to, he would never doubt it. He said he just doesn't have any doubts. And so he doesn't read the books that I read. He just doesn't have that sort of thing. And my sister's like that too. My sister says it's enough for her to look out the window and see a tree to give her faith that God has made the world, and for her to look into the sky. She said that's just enough for her. She goes, look at all this. This is what she says. Look at all of this. And so there definitely are some people out there. But what Jesus told us to do, and what I think some of these atheists and agnostics sort of don't want to do, is we do have to have that first step. We do have to take for example, when Jesus told the disciples after they'd been fishing all day, hey, just throw the net over here. And they were like, oh, come on, we're not going to catch anything. We haven't caught anything all day. Just throw it right over here. It's like, just have a little bit of faith. So they threw the net in, and they pulled up 153 fish. And then there's the time when Jesus told Peter, when Peter's sitting on the boat and Jesus is walking on water, and Peter wanted to go in too, and he started sinking. And Jesus said, oh, you have little faith. Why did you doubt? And so I think if we just have that little teeny mustard seed of faith, and then let Jesus water it. And so I just wanted to build on what you were saying a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. SJ. I mean, Ephesians chapter 2, that faith is a gift. Jesus is the author and finisher of our faith. Philippians 4, that Jesus is, he who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. And in Ephesians 2 again, that Jesus has prepared good works for us to walk in them. The good catch of fish, or the walking on the sea, or the breakfast at the end of John. Jesus has created us for a purpose, to walk in the gifts and things for which he has called us to do. And he's given us the gift of language. And, I was talking to Paul Gould yesterday. We were talking about Proverbs 8 and wisdom in the scriptures. And, it's personified. Of course, wisdom is personified in Christ, who is the Logos. And so we're storytellers. Good stories. I mean, look at Hollywood. Good scripts, good books are all carefully chosen words. And so the thing with street epistemology is they are carefully chosen words, but with intent. Everything that we speak, everything that we say, SJ, has intention. Words may change in their meanings over time, but the traditional convention of words that we all understand, without going into a great, infinite regress of what do words mean, we use words intentionally. And the great big void in street epistemology is their lack of words and intentionality in what truth is, or what the right way to know something is, or why faith is bad. In fact, I was going to join the street epistemology Discord server community. It's open to everybody, but like any community that I'm joining, especially if it's related to skeptics and atheists, I want to abide by the community rules. And so I read the community rules. And I read in the Discord community rules that
I saw this. Okay, this is very funny. You guys do listen to this.
If you in the Discord server, and this was in the rules, this was only a couple of days ago, and I wanted clarification from a street epistemologist who was in the Discord server to tell me more about this rule because it was a weird rule. I thought it was a weird rule. You make your own communities, you make your own rules, that's fine. But I'm not going to go into your community and violate on purpose. I won't do that. Mm-hmm. So the rule was, if you are a street epistemologist, so I don't know how they proffer that, but if you're a street epistemologist and you're engaged in conversation with someone in the server, don't tell them what you believe. And I seeing it in black and white was something of a cold water in the face, because in practice, SJ, with all of my engagement with street epistemologists, there are a few who will tell you what they really believe about epistemology, philosophy, and God. What is the confidence that they have in their own God belief, as they'll say? Mm-hmm. And so it was a weird rule, but it does, I say weird, but it does typify so many conversations where what they call the interlocutor. So they interview you, and if you're being interviewed, you're the interlocutor. But they are very reluctant to be very specific about their philosophy of truth and knowledge. Even Boghossian, in his book with Lindsay in 2019 and his 2013 book, the clear definition of what moral philosophy is, or what the right epistemology is, or what truth is. Some street epistemologists will say objective truth is real. How many, you've heard this a million times. Don't you want to believe as many true things as possible and as few false things as possible? Okay, well, tell me what's the right philosophy of knowledge to have. No, well, let's not do that. Let's examine your beliefs. And it's ambiguous. It's kind of dodgy in some sense. Now, like I said, it varies from street epistemologist to street epistemologist. I've had a rare few conversations with people who are explicit about what they believe. And they know I know what they're doing. And we have a great conversation. I'm not calling them dishonest. I'm just like, look, if you're challenging my faith, I'd appreciate we get to that conversation rather than the script. And we can have an honest conversation. And I want to know what you believe. And I'll share with you what I believe, and we can go back and forth with that. But saying you're not going to define what you believe to somebody you're talking about when you're talking about deeply held beliefs seems more of a friendly interrogation than a friendly conversation.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, Cam Spears, he's a friend of Pine Creek Doug's. He actually created a Facebook group, and he invited me to participate in the Facebook group. And so I went in there, and it was a group that was under the pretext that we're supposed to share our ideas, and it was going to be about the Bible and those sorts of things. And so I went in there and I looked at some of the things they were saying, and I disagreed with them. So I posted my views, and then I was told that I'm not allowed to I'm not allowed to post my views if they go against the views of the people who created the group. And it wasn't just Cam. There were a few people who created it. And I thought, what is this? So I'm like, why am I even here? And then so I went into Twitter and I complained about it on Twitter, and Cam Spears found me. And he said, now the new rule is that you're not allowed to complain on one social media platform about something that occurs on another one. And I'm like, you know what? Forget this group. It's so silly.
No jumping out of Stalag 13 and telling everybody what the camp is like in a certain sense. Yeah. Well, I understand. I've been in so many different groups. I do read the community rules, and if I join a community group, especially with skeptics, I want to honor their community rules. But I'm not going to deliberately go in there and start trolling or whatever. But if you wanted to talk about it, I thought we might, if you had, I don't know how long you go. I got plenty of time, but we might talk about, what's a common kind of conversation you might have with somebody who does SE, and then maybe how we can respond to it.
Oh, that's a good one. So let me ask you this. If I were to, because I think that one of the common questions is just what you said. It's a lot of probability questions as far as I can see. And so what they'll say is, how confident, like if I asked you this, how confident are you that Jesus Christ died for our sins and rose again? And so then how would you respond to that? And maybe you do have doubts. Maybe it's, maybe you say, well, I do have some doubts. I mean, maybe that's your case. So.
I say so you'll enter a conversation with a street epistemologist unaware. A lot of people don't know. They're not going to announce to you that's what they're doing. And even if you said, I'm a street epistemologist with a weird habit of talking to strangers about God, most people will go, well, that's cool. I'll have a 5-minute conversation. What they don't know, most of them, well, I've watched videos. I've never seen a street epistemology video where the person they start interviewing goes, oh, I know all about epistemology. That it's rare. I don't say it's never happened,
and
but
maybe
they catch
they
people
just don't
off
post
guard.
those
What's
videos.
epistemology? Yeah, and maybe they don't. But first of all, so the person that they interview doesn't know anything about street epistemology, doesn't know the atheistic intent, is brought in by that civility of the person asking, and SJ, and we all go through this. You meet somebody on a plane, you're at an airport, you start up small talk or whatever. You're in that zone of awkward, social, uncomfortability. You're like, I don't want to break this little that I've just created with my new friend and be awkward, right? So there is this psychological advantage that the street epistemologist, when approaching you, creates this bubble, social bubble, that you don't want to violate right off the bat, right? So you want to cooperate with what they're doing. And so one of the first questions they're going to ask you is a little strange, but because you're in that window, you don't want to sort of like react and seem weird, especially if you're on camera. And so you go along with the question, and usually the first question is, as you just asked, you want to talk about something that, we could talk about Cheetos or movies or Marvel comics or, cats or what kind of radial tires you should put on a Ford F-150 or whatever. Or we could talk about something, a deeply held belief. It's one of the last questions they'll ask you to try to sort of engender the whole God question. And then right off the bat, it's like, well, how confident are you that God exists? And there's a couple of ways that goes. One, they'll just let you, they're kind of assuming you're going to go with a number. If they don't tell you on a 1 to 10 scale or a 1 to 100 scale, they're going to assume that you're going to use a number, or they'll just give you a number. But a lot of people will just say, how confident are you? And somebody will say 100%. And then some of them will define 100%. They're like, oh, so for me, 100% is, so the atheist skeptic interlocutor will say, well, here's how I define 100%. And so the Christian or the atheist will go, oh, well, that's not what I mean. So let me dial down to 97. That is a genius trick, right? You've already got the guy or gal dialing down, which is what you're after. If you hear the confidence scale, if you hear that confidence question right off the bat, 99.9% of the time, their intent is to dial your confidence downward. Even if they get you from 100 to 90, it's a win. It's a psychological win. They've got you thinking. So, and I have a video, one of my 3 videos that I reviewed, I have this thing actually happening. I show it. I'm not making this up. There's a guy who does this. He says, how confident are you? The guy goes 100. And the street epistemologist says, 100? Well, here's how I define 100. Blah, 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 blah. And the skeptic goes, oh, well, that's not what I mean. Let's dial it down to 98. And then you can just come to see the inner rejoicing of the street epistemologist.
Yeah, it's like, what is that 2%?
He's not. He doesn't have a good poker face. He's excited about getting that reduction. But if you hear that on social media or somebody's talking to you or whatever, I guarantee you're in an elevator going down to the first floor. They're trying to get you off the top and down to the bottom. And so how I have answered that, it really how you answer this will really see where your interlocutor is coming from. When you just say, I'm sufficiently confident. I don't know how to quantify my confidence, but I'm sufficiently confident that Jesus is Lord or Jesus rose from the dead. And that's like a little earthquake in their, like, well, that's not on the script. What do I do? And for some of the younger practitioners that are not seasoned in this conversation, it kind of blows back a little bit. Some of the good ones, I say good ones in terms of when Anthony Magbastico talks to thousands of people, he gets good at interpersonal communication skills. I will have to Anthony. He knows how to talk to people, right? So Anthony is a pro. He can take that and he's like, oh, that's not a problem. And he can steer the conversation in a way that he doesn't need the number scale. He's got other things that he can say and do. But SJ, when that confidence question comes up, that's what they're after, is to try to reduce the person's confidence level. And that's where Christians need to be aware of, like we said earlier, a solid definition of faith. Because if you've identified as a Christian to a street epistemologist, they're going to go after that question of faith. And so it goes like this with that question. I'll just get right down to brass tacks. They get the Christian to define faith. Sometimes it's colloquial, like, oh, it's just by faith that I believe. And then the payoff question is, do you think faith is a reliable way to know the truth about something? And before that question comes up, they'll say, well, what about Allah? Or what about Vishnu? They'll bring up comparative religious questions. They won't even get into the content of comparative religious questions. They'll just say, this Muslim over here believes just like you do. This Hindu over there believes just like you do. I've talked to them on this college campus, they have the same kind of faith as you. And so therefore, is faith a reliable way to know the truth? But, to me, what I would say to that, and you don't even have to get into comparative religious analogies to respond to this. It's very simple, SJ. All you have to do, it's like Tim McGrew, the philosopher Tim McGrew. You recognize immediately. I mean, Tim is a professionally trained, well-respected philosopher at the University of Michigan.
Yeah, he is.
Somewhere in Michigan.
I've had him on my channel,
the name
too.
Of the school, but Tim is brilliant. Tim is brilliant, and so is his wife, Lydia. They together, they're like a giant brain. They make up like one brain, and they're scary smart, and their children are amazing at chess.
Their children are too.
Make Deep Blue look like they can play chess that would make Deep Blue look like a bowl of Cheerios. They're incredibly intelligent people. And so Tim points out, he's like, look, I'm a philosopher, and I know that there's people who use reason and logic to come to different conclusions about certain philosophical concepts. So, on that premise, should we abandon reason and logic because professional philosophers have used reason and logic to come to different conclusions about philosophical concepts? I mean, I looked up epistemology on the Stanford Encyclopedia online. There are hundreds of entries on epistemology. And I'll use that sometimes when talking to street epistemology. Which one of these epistemologies should I adopt? If you're going to question my method of thinking, I want to adopt the right epistemology. What's the one that you have? Or which one of these is the best one to have? So immediately, what that question does is it shows it's not faith, it's not logic, it's not reason, but it is human subjectivity, which is perfectly fine. Human subjects who have a variety of different opinions and likes and dislikes and all this other stuff. You can't just narrow it down to one thing like faith and say, well, that's a problem. That's like saying, well, what's wrong with you medically? You can't just say, well, it's because you ate too much cheese. There are a host of other factors in your body that go into how a doctor does diagnosis. He could rule it down to cheese, but ruling something down to one epistemic thing like faith or logic or reason with all the other factors that go into what a human being believes, culture, family, socioeconomic status, all presuppositions, your educational status, whatever the case may be, street epistemologists can't narrow faith. They don't know. They can't isolate it like that. That's the trick. That seems like they've intellectually isolated the problem. Look at the Hindu, the Muslim, and the Christian all using faith. Well, look at the Hindu culture and the Muslim culture. You don't even have to get into the comparative religions to see how many different factors are involved in what it means to be human, to know what causes such subjectivity along a broad continuum. And of course, for the Christian, if you want to get into comparative religion, there's nothing like the resurrection, speaking, and the Gospels, the manuscripts, so you can get into all that arguments. But what's funny is, it's funny, I don't mean funny, haha, like I'm making fun of them, but in Boghossian's both books that I mentioned, they recommend to the interventionist epistemologists not to get into debates and facts about apologetics with theists. They avoid that and get into the epistemic problems. But I've basically, in all my conversations, what I've just shared with you has untangled that whole epic problem, the whole epistemic approach to a lot of street epistemologists that are causing doubt because they're unfamiliar with epistemology, they're unfamiliar with apologetics, they don't have a solid foundation themselves for how they know what they know. And so I get underneath their assumptions, and so they're not going to go there, or they'll get rude, or they'll get personal, or they'll say that you're not being cooperative because you've thought about these things. In fact, I won't call anybody out. That's not my desire to. But I've had street epistemologists say, "Well, Dan, God saved you from suicide and despair and depression. Therefore, you don't want to challenge beliefs." Well, have you seen anything that I've just said in the last 100 times about all the things that I do with my job and how I've challenged my faith and the degrees that I have and the knowledge that I have? No, that doesn't count because you won't challenge your faith. Look, I've been on atheist podcasts. I've read atheist books. I've done a ton of stuff that has, been challenging to my faith. But it is, SJ, a kind of psychological evaluation as well. And when they finally are sort of out of bullets, if you will, some of the interlocutors they'll just start doing psychological, personal ad hominem things. Some of them will, not all of them. But at that point, that you can sort of end the conversation politely. Thanks, I appreciate your time, and you'd be civil about it. But you don't even really have to know a ton of stuff about Christian apologetics to be able to nuance through this kind of tactic. Sorry, I rambled so long.
No, not at all. I wanted to build on something that you said there, though, because I'm just thinking of one of the questions, and I'm wondering how you would answer this particular question. So I'm looking at the genetic fallacy that people will say, well, where you were born dictates what you believe. And you kind of touched on your culture and all of these influences that do come from our environment. And so, and I was asked a question kind of similar like to that by, I think Pine Creek Doug asked me that before. How do you know that if you were born in a Muslim country, would you be a Muslim? I get that sort of a question. And so how would you, and I know how I'd answer that, but how would you answer something like that?
Well, it's kind of like, if I lived in Siberia, Stalin, would I use a pickaxe or a shovel? I don't know. I mean, given the fact that Christianity is in every part of the globe, more or less, that's not at all. I mean, not to mention the simple logical fallacy that it is. There's no way you can know that. I mean, again, it gets to that what Tim McGrew says: possibilities are cheap. You can say all you want to. If you were in a Muslim country, would you be a Muslim? Well, there are Christians in Muslim countries. There are Christians in China. There are Christians in Korea. There are Christians in the former Soviet Union. There are Christians in the Eastern Bloc countries. There are Christians in Alaska. There are Christians in Greenland. There are Christians in South America. There are penguins in Antarctica, but I don't think they're Christians, But Brother Guy Consolmagno has been to Antarctica looking for meteorites. So Brother Guy's been among. So there have been Christians to Antarctica. But it's not a defeater for anything, SJ, to make you wonder. It's like if you were born in Yugoslavia, would you have been a Christian? I don't know. I wasn't raised a Christian. I came to Christ at 26 years of age. But it seems like you could postulate any possibility. It's like, if a garden gnome popped up on your rutabagas and gave you a message that said Jesus, really didn't exist, would that lower your confidence? I mean, that's not a defeater. It's not an argument. And also let's just answer it. You say, or probably I'll be a Muslim. Well, what does that say? That says nothing about what I believe, SJ. Nothing. It only says what I think I would do. Yeah. It has absolutely, it doesn't touch the belief at all. And it's just a personal thing. And you feel free to answer that question, but it doesn't dig at Christianity whatsoever. It doesn't show that one religion is more valid than the other, and it doesn't discount one religion more than the other. It's just a personal thought about what you would have if you lived in Russia, or somewhere. So it's not a defeater like they think it is. And it's a fallacy, first of all, just because of, I shouldn't eat beans because they were grown in Siberia or something. The beans came from Siberia, therefore they're bad, is a genetic fallacy. We don't. Does that make sense?
I agree. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And I mean, I was just thinking to myself I think we all have this underlying desire to search for the truth. Like we want to think that we believe what is reality, and we want the truth that we believe in to align perfectly with reality because that makes it the truth. And so I think that Christians, a lot of times, no matter how you're raised, you could be raised as a Muslim or you're raised as a Hindu, whatever it is, if you're going to invest your time or your life into your faith, whatever it is, you're going to want to make sure that your faith is true. And so at some point in your life, you're going to have to do look under the table skirt or whatever. You've got to figure out, is this the truth? I need to know, because I don't want to be following and investing my time in something false. And so I did that. I left the Catholic faith in my 20s and wandered around looking at all of these other faiths. And then I came back because I realized, no, Jesus isn't just a great moral teacher. It was C.S. Lewis's words that brought me back, actually. Jesus is, he's, you liar, lunatic, or Lord. And the fourth one, legend, well, we can rule that out with 1 Corinthians 15. And so, anyway, so I just want to say, I think if those of us who have decided that is Christianity, we want to know if what we're following is the truth. And some Christians, like you pointed out earlier, my husband, my sister, they're not going to do any more work because they feel quite content with where they stand right now. But then there's someone like me. I need to know like that this is the truth. I'm not going to waste my time worshiping
Sure.
other gods. So that's my that's just my point.
Well, and there is so let's get back to the genetic fallacy for just a second. There's something else that that does come up, and I could certainly say, and I didn't mention this at first, but I could certainly predict that if someone is born in Istanbul or Baghdad or Saudi Arabia or Mecca, if someone is born into that country, that I could predict that they might become Muslim, they might become an atheist, they might become a Christian, but the likelihood of just basic prediction is fine. It doesn't mean that Christianity isn't true because I was born in a Saudi Arabian city and therefore I'm going to be a Muslim, therefore Christianity isn't true. That's kind of how it's used, but there's nothing wrong with saying that, if you're born in Saudi Arabia, you're probably, if you grow up in a religious household, you'll probably at least grow up learning Islam, Shia or Sunni or whatever. If you're in India, you'll probably grow up learning about Hinduism in your culture. Sure. But usually how this is used, SJ, it's like, well, I can predict that this guy being born in Mumbai is going to be a, okay, therefore God doesn't exist. I mean, that's kind of how the argument works, that they want to say that because this guy in Mumbai that therefore your God it doesn't exist. And the other funny thing, because atheists will use this all the time, and they'll say, the United States isn't a Christian nation. All right, so then geographically I shouldn't be a Christian because I'm not being raised in a Christian nation. You people say it's not a Christian nation. I'm born in a secular country or a democratic republic. It's up in the air what kind of religion I would be born into here in the United States, and I was not born into a religious family. I grew up in California, and there's a lot of if the United States is a secular country, and you want to use the genetic fallacy in this regard, and you can say, well, I was raised in a secular household, therefore I'm going to learn secularism and atheism, like Sarah Salvander in our book on black holes. She was raised in an atheist household. All her family are believers now. And
oh, really? I didn't know that.
It just falls apart. The whole genetic fallacy. Sanjit was born in Mumbai, therefore Jesus doesn't exist because those people are Hindus and those people are Muslims, and that's kind of how I see the fallacy being leveled, especially in social media. It doesn't do any damage to Jesus or the Christian faith whatsoever. It's just like saying, if I lived in Alaska, I'd probably have a lot more warm clothing than I do living in Texas. I could predict that. But that doesn't, do away with warm weather in Texas or whether God exists, right? And so that's just a point that I see a lot too. So,
are you familiar with Michael Heiser's work?
I know him, and he's on my list of things to read. I would love to. Yes, I am intending to be familiar with his work.
The reason I'm bringing him up is because I always did have those questions in my mind, because at one point I think I was kind of a progressive Christian from what I'm gathering now, looking back on what I've read and what I believed at one time. And I had this idea that was actually perennialism, where I thought that everyone was going to get to Christ no matter what. And so, or everyone was going to end up in heaven or in nirvana. I didn't actually have Christ specified in those sort of beliefs. But one of the reasons I'm bringing that up is because Psalm 82, Michael Heiser's book, Unseen Realm, is fantastic. And Psalm 82 talks about the sons of God. And it talks about these spiritual beings that are present in the world and how many of them had gone awry. And so many of them were doing things to dupe humans. And it actually explains to me why we do have the presence of Hinduism with these 3,000 or gods, however many gods Hindus have, or we have the idea of the Muslim. I actually believe that those could have been spiritually inspired, and maybe they're still being spiritually inspired. And so I know that sounds crazy, and people will say, you're a polytheist. No, because it's very clear that there's only one worthy of worship. The rest of these gods are out there, and Jesus said at some point we'll be sons of God or daughters and sons of God. But this idea that and we are spiritual beings ourselves. But there's this idea that there's these other forces out there isn't any different. It's not inconsistent with with what we see in the Bible and what we see in life. And so I just wanted your thoughts on some of that.
Right. Yeah. The other day on Twitter, I put something out, and it was a sort of a nuanced analogy. Some people got it, some people didn't. I'm very nuanced in my tweets. So people read my surface tweets and they respond on the surface. I'm like, no, you need to think twice about that. That's not what I meant. So that's fun to do. I have fun with people with that, doing that. But the other day I put out, look at all the currencies in the world. There's so many currencies in the world that I don't believe money exists. They can't all possibly have value. And they can't all possibly be money because they can't all possibly cohere. There's so many different currencies in the world that I don't believe money exists. I just believe one less currency than you do. Well, and people pushed back and they said, well,
I love that.
Well, this people were like, well, wait a minute, that's a dumb analogy because God's not like money. Money is man-made, and look, I can open my wallet and see here's money. I said, no, that's exactly the point of the tweet. Money is man-made, and the objection is that God is man-made. Look at all these man-made gods. Therefore, I don't think God exists at all. It's all man-made. I just believe in one less God than you do. And it also, SJ, gets down to the question of evidence. Somebody tweeted me and says, well, look, Bray, I can open my wallet and pull out money. I said, no, that's not what I need. That's currency. That doesn't prove money exists. That's the claim, not the evidence of money, right? So I use money as a biblical text, right? So the analogy, people are like, oh, so the analogy is, no, that's not money. That's not money. That is the claim that there is such a thing as value or money, but that's not proof. So I'm using that same sort of logic that religion is man-made, and the paper currency is not proof of anything. It's the claim, which is what people say. The Bible is the claim, not the evidence. And so that thread didn't go very long, but that's kind of the gist of the idea that there's so many different gods and goddesses across so many different cultures, like Lewis and the Tao in the Abolition of Man, who collected all of these laws and regulations and rules and ethics from societies both old and current, and suggested, look at this, within mankind we're coming up with the same stuff over time, over period, over years. People say that Christianity is from mythology or whatever, that we just borrowed this and borrowed that and borrowed this, but no, look at the consistency, and that's what Lewis did. Look at the consistency, belief, and duty, moral duties, and who we are and what we are as a culture and a society. Look at how similar everything is. Not to say that Christianity is borrowing from other religions, but that if we are made in the image of God, we are going to reflect the image of God in much the same way. But because of sin and because of the ruinness of our fall, and our cognitive capacity has been distorted by our desire to know good and evil like God does, because of this sin nature, we are all going to have all these perverse ideas about God. But to your point, SJ, about Michael Heiser, it's not just intellectual abstraction that we're dealing with here. We're dealing with of spirituality that most materialists find, now you're off the map because you're talking about devils and angels. Now you've just gone kooky. And so they deny the spirit. I mean, in the West, we just had, Craig Keener on talking about miracles last night. And where are the miraculous things in Western societies? They generally are not happening as much as they are in these other countries where the church is growing underground. Miracles of healing and things are bringing together large Black people who are worshiping Jesus because of the miracles that he does in their midst. But you see in the West a sort of complacency in a technology where we're kind of like Nazareth, right? Where Jesus did a lot of miracles because of our unbelief, because of our rational thinking that we know everything, and that the miraculous and the supernatural is just not a part of reality. Even among Christians, we don't talk about demons and angels and the spiritual realm and fallen beings and how we're influenced by the principalities and powers in the air. Ephesians 6. I mean, we're told to put on the armor of God. We're wrestling with things on a daily basis. The Satan prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. And it was the exhortation in James to submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Only supposed to be applied one time. Do you think herd of the things that went into the herd of swine, that's all done? That the man among the tombs who was possessed by a legion, do you think that stopped happening 2,000 years ago? We're dealing with a spiritual reality that a lot of materialists, naturalists, secularists, atheists want to deny as mythology, hodgepodge nonsense. Meanwhile, they're a very real thing. I mean, I liken it to invisible bank robbers. If a bunch of bank robbers can get together and convince a society that's dependent on a fiscal, banking system to convince them that they don't exist, so that when their vaults are suddenly mysteriously emptied, nobody's going to blame bank robbers because they don't exist. We've convinced people that bank robbers don't exist. And in some sense, this is how the demonic spiritual world is getting away with things, because we don't even acknowledge them. We don't read in warfare. And it's not to, Jesus said, don't rejoice that you have power over the spirits, but that your names are written in the Lamb's book of life. But we do warfare with real fallen spiritual beings. And that's anathema to a secularist atheist mindset. I agree. So that's why I want to read Heisler. I kind of know where he's going, and I want to detail how he's going there. So
it's really good.
Excellent point.
His stuff is good. No, I agree with you on all of that. And I think that they're definitely, I think we can see evidence even on Twitter of demonic activity, to be honest. I mean, some of the persistence that some of these people have to spend all of their lives on Twitter fighting with theists and fighting with Christians makes me think this persistence to me shows me there's something else going on there, because this is not a rational activity. If you honestly think God doesn't exist, why are you spending your life beating up on Christians all day long? I mean, who does that?
Yeah. I mean, I enjoy Twitter, but I will end the conversation quickly if they get personal. I have no vested interest in having the last word. If you get snarky and mean and rude, I'm spending any more time on that. It's unnecessary. But why would you go to the length that you do to make Christians on Twitter look bad? Now, Christians on Twitter can look bad. I mean, that's a tragedy as well. I mean, we all do that. I am not perfect. I get frustrated, and it's difficult. Social media is a very difficult thing, but now online, because of COVID, it's more prominent. We're using screen time more prominently, but I still think it's a great way to practice patience, gentleness, self-control, and hopefully, I've done that. I'm not perfect at it, and if I've hurt somebody on purpose, I apologize if I can't. And I'm not out there to make fun of skeptics or atheists, or I'm not out to get Anthony Magnabosco or make any street epistemology look bad. I try to be as congenial about what I see good in what they're doing. And I think Anthony generally likes the idea of having civil conversation, but then I don't trust Anthony's atheism. Not that Anthony's a bad person, but that if anybody, not just Anthony, is using it for atheistic intentions, I think that's disingenuous, and that we need to do that. But I'm not out to get any of them personally. That's not my intention. I would like to have that conversation. If they converted to Christianity, I want to be somebody they'd want to talk to, not somebody they'd want to run away from. So that's kind of how I try to structure my conversation and address the problems that I think are inherently going to plague street epistemology when they try to engage theists.
Yeah, no, I think that there's, I think that you've answered a lot of the questions that the street epistemologists come up with pretty well in this conversation. So I've really enjoyed that. I wanted to go back, kind of circle back to something that you mentioned earlier, and you were talking about, and I need to probably reread your book again. So everybody, if you're just joining, The Story of the Cosmos is the book, How the Heavens Declare the Glory of God. But you mentioned this chapter on space, which I'm kind of forgetting right now. But what I do remember, I just want to point out something, because I've read some of C.S. Lewis's books multiple times, and one of them is The Great Divorce. And one of the things that C.S. Lewis said that I think it kind of relates to your space idea is he has this vision of sort of a heaven-like existence and a hellish sort of existence. And the hellish existence in the book, and this is a fiction, but the hellish existence in the book is the gray area or something like that. And it's the gray area before you actually meet the true evil. And so all of these people are voluntarily in this gray area. And the thing that C.S. Lewis says that's so fascinating is he talks about how they can have whatever they think of. So they can have a new house, they could have a new yard, they could do anything that they can think up, but it's never really that great, whatever they think of. But they can also have the space that they have. So as soon as they come into a town, they get to know somebody, they end up in a squabble and they end up leaving. And so they keep getting further and further from each other in this sort of hell because they have abundant space. but they don't have anything tying them together in a community because they can just think up whatever they want. And so he talks about the value of scarcity. And I thought it was just such a fascinating thing, and kind of helps to understand, why do we have scarce resources, and why is the world structured the way it is, that we have to sort of form these communities and get people together. So I just was wondering if you have read that book and thought about that at all.
Yeah, The Great Divorce. I read it when I was doing my master's degree with Michael. And, Lewis's argument is, people, when they see heaven, they get on this bus and they get to go up to heaven, and they get this option. You can get off here if you want to. They don't. And now C.S. Lewis was, theologically Arminian. He believed in the volition aspect, the whole free will thing. C.S. Lewis clearly falls on the non-Calvinist and non-determinist side of things. But all that to say, the writing is still very valuable in that I think he has a valuable point. On RSJ, none of us would choose heaven, I don't think. I mean, even the propensity of whether or not you think a series of successive choices in life hard against the possibility of God ever saving us, or whether you think God's grace breaks in and saves you despite anything, despite what you want, the truth of what I think The Great Divorce teaches is that nobody really wants to pick heaven, in our nature. It's uncomfortable. It's different. It's demanding. It seems impossible. It seems too bright, too real. I mean, that's one of the ways in which Lewis describes heaven. It's too real. It's too infirm. Emily Dickinson has a poem called, I can't think of the name of the poem, but Truth's Superb Surprise. That we must tell all the truth, but tell it slant. For truth is too bright for our infirm eyes. You have to sort of gradually. And so these people get on the bus and they go into this heaven and they see how beautiful and real it is. It's too real. It's too beautiful. It's too real for our fallen nature to. So if Lewis says in this analogy, if this were to happen, people aren't going to get off the bus. It just it is offensive to our fallen nature. And to me, I like the passage in John. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit shall remain. That I think that Jesus has to give us that gift of faith. He has to start that regenerate work and desire in us. And it's that flesh and spirit, Romans 7, where the things that I want to do, I don't do. The things that I hate, those things I do. And so the Great Divorce reminds me a little bit of what Paul's saying in Romans 7. I want to get off the bus. This is probably where I should hang out for the rest of eternity. But I don't want to. I want to go back to the gray place or worse. I prefer that. And Jesus, it's like the guy on his pallet, on his bed at the fountain, and Jesus says to him, "Do you want to be?" The guy doesn't say yes or no. He just goes, Jesus, I've been sitting here so long. Every time I try to get down into that's not the question I asked you. Do you want to be made well? And he's kind of like, well, no, not really. He's not going, yes, please heal me. He's like, I'm kind of apathetic about it. And I think that captures what the spirit of what Lewis is talking about in that regard. So we don't, by our natures, we don't find Christianity in the afterlife attractive. We don't. We have to learn through.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say it's this
okay.
idea of being exposed, our sins being exposed. That's one of the things that was running through there too, the theme where you don't want to come out and have, like, you're almost invisible. All of your sins are just revealed to everyone. So people would rather go down and buy time in the gray area. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Nobody wants to, to come into that truth. But Michael, you mentioned Michael's chapter in Story of the Cosmos. And it's all about, Lewis gets into Lewis's love of language and imagination, and people, Michael, that it's a shame to call Lewis's science fiction work a space trilogy, because that's exactly what he was trying to avoid. Is he fought, and it seems needlessly, it would say, because we use the word space. He fought against this idea of the heavens being a vacuity, and when you think about it, it's kind of like SJ, the pessimist optimist, glass half full, glass half empty test. You look at the cosmos, do you go space or heavens? which one is more, the space is sort of the empty, right? And heavens is like, no, it's half full. Look at this stuff. And Psalm 19, I think the space thing, and I am a fan here of Lewis, and so I agreed with him, obviously, and that's why Michael's in this book, that the space is the wrong word. It's just the wrong word. We think of hard drive space, storage space, square footage space. We have this association of emptiness with it. And that's like the farthest thing from the truth, because what does Psalm 19? It's one of the most oft quoted natural Psalms used for doing natural theology. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament or the skies show his handiwork. Day unto day pours forth speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. It's like calling a bank vault with $1 billion worth of crown jewels in it empty. No, I mean, yeah, you can walk around in the vault, but it's not empty. You can look up at the vault of the heavens and you can say, well, there's nothing out there. But really, that's a denigration on what the Bible actually reveals is going on up there. So again, I would even go so far as to say that the language that we are using today about the universe is very destructive, impersonal, scientistic, negative. And, secular astronomers want to have their beauty cake and their destruction cake at the same time. Look at all this danger, death, seething, explode, death, horrible things, but nobody, except for a couple of Apollo astronauts, but that was even here on the launch pad, and then a couple of shuttle accidents. Space hasn't killed anybody, by and large. It's still the safest place to be. If you think about in terms of casualties and number of people and things that we've done and spent, but we're not supposed to be out there. It's not deadly. It's only deadly if we try to go colonize Europa. Well, what are we doing? Or going to Mars? Well, then you're going to have some problems. But should you be doing that? Carl Sagan has a wonderful letter that he wrote just before he died. He wrote to astronauts on Mars. He says, "I don't know why you're there, but I wish I were with you." So he's saying, like, I'm not sure why we would be on Mars. Why would we be on Mars? I don't know. And that's the sort of the sad kind of thing, SJ, that all this time and expenditure for all these things. I mean, you think the most futuristic human endeavor in space has been like 50 years in our past, which is the Apollo missions. But I say all this to say, look at all the expenditures and money and time and effort and human ingenuity and careers that are given to the field of astrophysics, astronomy, and cosmology. The heavens are declaring something, and people are building their entire lives and investing billions of dollars and time and energy and effort into studying what they are. That's not empty space. Something is going on there.
I want to add on to something that you said, even recently, what we've seen. So I just want to point a couple things out on the importance of language and how we really need to be very cognizant of what people are doing to change our language, for example, or to change the value of other humans based on language. And I can just talk about the abortion issue when people refer to babies as clumps of cells or they don't refer to them as unborn children. Those sorts of things that dehumanizes the person. And it's even, you guys probably notice, you and I are both of older generations. And so I can look back to a time when in the 70s, for example, we referred to, and 80s and 90s, we referred to people as waiters and waitresses or as stewards and stewardesses and all that kind of stuff. We had gender-based language, and gender was another way to say sex. It was the exact same thing. It didn't have a different meaning. Today, we're seeing different meanings in a lot of this kind of stuff. And so I just think it's interesting. So you kind of have to watch it. Where did this idea of space come from? This idea that why do we call it outer space? Why don't we call it something more like cosmos or just something more interesting? And so it would be interesting really to trace that back. And it sounds like, is that what, because I haven't read Space Trilogy. Is that what C.S. Lewis did? Did he trace that back? And I'm going to reread Michael's chapter, by the way.
Studies in Words is one of Lewis's great books. Lewis was a philologist. He loved words, and there's not a word that Lewis didn't choose purposefully, because he wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. People forget were written by one of these. The Chronicles of Narnia were written by hand on legal pads or something like that, and then they were typeset, of course. But Lewis wrote them out. So he was very careful in his choice of words. With our word processors, we don't have to be careful. We can just and go back and fix it. But when you're writing by hand and you write a paragraph, you want to edit. It's a lot of work. So you have to be deliberate as you're going. And so he was very deliberate. And I love the point you make, SJ, that this exact same thing, how language is so focused and intent on our ontology and our being, that we use language as identity. Language and identity go hand in hand. And right words have to be chosen. We are imagio Dei, created in the image of God. And if we use language counter to that, getting back to our freeway analogy, the grain of which language is, grain of which reality is going, and we use language that is counter to what God says of us, then we are literally not only anti-human, anti-Christ, we are defying and denying what God has said of us in Christ, who we are, what we are. And the baby is perfect. That's a human being all the way down to the single cell. Why? Because Jesus, taking on incarnate flesh, identified humanity from the first cell all the way through the 9th month of birth. He identified with that all the way from the first cell, as we understand today, all the way to death. And he was the prototype new human. He was fully God, fully human, but he identified with humanity in utero. So that says that life in the womb is valuable because God intended it. My father was the product of a adulterous relationship and was given up for adoption in the 30s when, and the woman tried to keep him under wraps from the family until she couldn't hide it anymore. But dad was given up for adoption. He was the product of an adulterous affair. I've kind of wrestled with that. But I say all that to say that Jesus, the human lineage, Jesus has adultery in it. That the Son of Man
that's so true.
Came through an adulterous lineage. And so,
David.
Yeah, identifying David, even, identifying intimately with our humanity and our sin. He's the sin-bearing servant who came through a broken lineage, a broken human lineage, perfectly divine, but perfectly human way, tempted as we are, the man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. So, the language I talk about in the cosmos is malleable. We can go to Mars and do whatever we want to do on the surface of Mars. Really? We can go to Enceladus, or we can go to Europa, and we can do this and we can do that, and we can pull some gas off of Jupiter. We can go over here to Saturn and do this, and we can throw our space probe junk into the atmosphere of Saturn. We can just kind of go out, and the universe is malleable, and we can do whatever we want to with it. You see what's going? The conditioning of our minds to think that we know enough about the universe, that we can go out there and we can do this, we can colonize, we can put rockets out, and we should be doing this. Is it stopping to asking why we're doing any of this? I'm not saying that space exploration and cosmology and all that science is bad. It's just that I think by and large the field has a problem defining why they're doing these things. And so without asking the why question, that's where language starts to fall apart, SJ, because nobody knows fundamentally what the ultimate purpose is. And people are defining things as we're going along. Steven Weinberg, the universe looks pointless to me. Sandra Faber, who is a cosmologist at Santa Barbara, I think it's Santa Barbara, the universe looks pointless to her. There's a lot of people that don't see any teleology or purpose in the universe. And yet they're careerists or cosmologists. They don't think the universe has a point, but they've dedicated their entire lives to studying it. That's a weird state of affairs. I don't know what has, but I'm going to devote my entire life to studying it.
Yeah.
It's kind of odd. I don't know why I'm doing this.
Hugh Ross has said that physically we would not survive at all on Mars. There's no matter what they're trying to come up with, because of the way the atmosphere is. There's no possibility of survival for humans. He says that astronauts have physical problems when they get closer to there. So there's some issues that we don't know about, and we should probably not go out there. I agree with you on that. But I'm coming up on a 133 here, so I wanted to see if you had, and I know you were going to give away 2 books, but I wanted to see if you have any parting ideas or anything like that we should be thinking about, and also what you're working on, if people, and how they can find you. I don't think I put your link in here, but I will put links to your Twitter account and to I'm sure you have a Story of the Cosmos account somewhere too, right?
Yes, I have many. Actually, it sounds, but I don't have a lot. I have a YouTube channel. that I do for work. It's starting to grow because I'm doing videos for work. But I work at watchman.org, watchman.org. And I am a full-time staff apologist. Watchman is an interfaith evangelistic outreach to Mormons, Jehovah's Witness, Muslims. We have almost a 600-page profile notebook where we put all of our 4-page essays on certain non-Christian religions, non-Christian ideologies. I've written profiles on Carl Sagan's Cosmos, on scientism with Luke Barnes, and just this one on Peter Boghossian. And so I work for Watchman. We're apologetics ministry and organization centered here in Arlington, Texas, watchman.org. My salary is 100% supported, donator supported, but sometimes I ask for it on Twitter. But I'm on Twitter at story_cosmos, at story_cosmos. You can follow me there. I have a YouTube channel, Daniel Ray, Story of the Cosmos. And then the Story of the Cosmos website, we have a book, and it's not an active, we don't actively staff it, but it's got interactive videos. It shows you the staff contributors. It's a little bit more than the peak than what you're going to get on Amazon for the book. You can meet all the contributors and see their bios. There's a brief summary of all the chapters there, and there's videos about the book and multiple ways to order the book from that website. So it's the storyofthecosmos.com. You can find out more about the book before you go buy the book. It helps you make a little bit more intelligible decision about whether you want to buy the book or not. You can see the authors. That's the storyofthecosmos.com. And then I have the Good Heavens podcast, which is a podcast about the universe. My friend Wayne, we've been doing that for over 3 years. That's at patreon.com/goodheavens, patreon.com/goodheavens. Then we have the Apologetics Profile podcast, which is another podcast I produce for Watchman Fellowship. And that can be found on Apple Podcasts, our home Podomatic. You can find Apologetics Profile on Podomatic, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, where other fine podcasts are found. And I'm probably forgetting something, but that's kind of all I can remember right now. And so I have done also 3, if you go to my YouTube channel, I have done 3 videos on street epistemology. 2 of them were reviewed by street epistemologists, and the third one wasn't. And if you watch it, you'll know why. It goes through their method and kind of exposes one street epistemologist who practices street epistemology to destroy Christianity or just dismantle Christian.
Oh, really? I'm going to have to go look at that.
It's a trick. Yeah, so he does it as a trick. Yeah. And some street epistemologists don't agree with that approach.
I want to put a link to that in my.
Here it is.
Hey, Daniel, is there a place where I can go and get all, because you have a ton of ways to get a hold of you. So is there a place where I can copy and paste all of this stuff and also a link to that particular video? Because I want to watch that right away. So yeah,
I will, when we're done here, I will send you, let's see. Yeah, when we're done here, I'll send you a DM with all.
Perfect.
Because I've got to go hunt it down. I need to get a Linktree account so I can do this, but yeah, I'll DM you everything.
Okay.
When we're done,
perfect.
And you can post it underneath.
Because I was trying to take notes, but I know I missed a couple. So, well, cool. So
okay.
what are you working on now? I know you're with Watchmen doing a lot of work for them. What's the next article you're going to write?
Well, Monday I am teaching a class at Arlington Bible College to a freshman, sophomore apologetics class. We are going to be talking about how the heavens declare the glory of God. And then we're going to be unpacking Carl Sagan's Cosmos. And so
Very
today
nice.
I am seriously toying with a book idea. I have to run it by my boss and everything. Everything you need to know about atheism, you can learn on Twitter.
Are you serious? You're going to do that? That's the title?
I don't know.
That's hilarious.
I thought about it. I don't know. Don't know how it's going to go over very well. I don't want to make people mad, but it would be a book title that would certainly sell titles. But I don't know if I want to own that title or not.
You kind of have to do. I mean, it's just like I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. You kind of have to do those sorts of titles to get attention. Yeah. So
I'm not that kind of a person. I don't like to like that. But if God says go for it, I will. It would be a small book. It would be small and funny, and I think it would be, I would write it with the mind of my atheist friends who I respect. And, I'd be like, hey, you guys need to laugh at this. Okay. And they're like, yeah, I gotta think about how I would do that. But in all seriousness, I am, my specialty at Watchmen is science, the intersection of science and faith, of course. And that's where I do it. So hopefully another book. I'm open to, we have a couple of book projects at Watchmen. We're thinking of doing either publishing or self-publishing through the ministry on, addressing common questions for certain religions, how to answer Islam, how to answer Mormonism, how to answer Jehovah's Witnesses, basic apologetic defenses kinds of books. We may self-publish. We've got a book proposal, but that would involve James, me, and Brady if we did that. But now we're trying to get speaking in and around Dallas, Fort Worth, and that's what we do. We before COVID, we were going around speaking and things, but I do YouTube stuff now. This is how I'm normally doing speaking engagements on YouTube. So I'm free for that. If you contact me through email or Twitter, whatever, I can do that as well. And now, if you don't mind, me announce the YouTube winner.
Yes.
Of 2 books from Twitter. I did a random number generator. This was not any bias on my half. Counted all my likes on the tweet, and there was 50 some odd likes. So I random number generated number 17 and number 42. So 17, Angie Contreras. Congratulations, Angie. I will DM you if you're listening. I don't know if you're listening. And Michael Gottschall. I don't know if Gottschall, how to pronounce his name. I'm probably killing it, but I have their accounts. They follow me. Michael Gottschall, and Angie Contreras have 2 Story of the Cosmos, one for each coming their way.
Very
signed
nice.
by me. So I'll be doing more of that on my Twitter handle from time to time. So anybody have any questions? And then I don't know. Everybody happy in the comment section?
Yeah, I want to say thank you to everybody in the comment section too. I see right now I'm looking at Cafe and Stripper Liquor and Hate Love Nothing, Rachel, and I've also seen people like Truth Seeker on here, and I saw who else did I see? Craig Reed. I saw some of my other friends, and I saw Blaster Master. So a lot of people are pretty active here in the chat. So and Rachel's just saying congrats to the winners, and she loves giveaways.
Yeah.
And so thank you guys.
They're kind
and David Riskin I see here too. So I want to say hi to, let me just make sure I get a few people mentioned really quickly. Converse Contender, it said he came on here earlier. And so if I missed you guys, sorry if I'm missing you in the chat, but thank you so much everybody for coming in here and enjoying this. And so the next video I'm going to make is I'm going to review an old debate that I did with Paula Gia, and we debated on Jesus's, if we had enough information on Jesus's resurrection. And so I'm going to review that debate. It's from 2019 on probably a Monday, but I have to figure out the time exactly. And after that, I'm going to be interviewing Glenn Scrivener. And Glenn Scrivener is a person from the UK who actually went in a debate with Matt Dillahunty, and I think he did a pretty rock star job. And so I'll be interviewing him on the 12th. And so make sure you guys all come back for that, okay? Oh, and one last, here's Cafe ask a question. Oh, wait, 2 questions. Question, is it wise to not preach poorly? That's from Hate Love Nothing. And then there was another one here. Cafe says, would you ever consider calling into an episode of Truth Wanted if Anthony Magnabusco ever co-hosts with Objectively Dan? So, I don't think
I will shed. Was that for you or for me?
I think it's for you. Both of them.
Okay. Just some background for everybody. I have talked to Anthony. I wouldn't say at length. With some behind the scenes conversations, and Anthony and I have come to an agreement that dialogue between us, I respect his decision with everything on his plate, that he chose not to continue dialoguing with me, but did say he welcomed any continued criticism or anything that I might have, but he didn't see it necessary that he and I get into some sort of dialogue or anything. And, by his nature, he doesn't like to debate. I know that. So I respect that. And I respect Anthony. I'm not out to get him in that regard. So I don't think there's going to be any sort of back and forth between Anthony and I, and there's nothing, I don't think he's, running away or anything like that. It's just, I understand he's busy. And he did say, if I wanted to continue to contribute to the SE community with the things I'm doing, this is fine. So there's that. And I just wanted to make that very clear. I don't agree with Anthony's atheism, but I don't hate Anthony. I have nothing against him at all. What was the other question about preaching?
Yeah, the other one's, is it if you're not a very good preacher, should you not bother preaching? If you're not good at it.
Oh. Well, God uses anything. And I think, I was very zealous as a new believer and didn't know half of what I was talking, but God used what I did anyway. So, none of us are really good preachers. I mean, there are some really good that have some really bad theology who are really good at preaching, but aren't preaching truth. And then there are people that preach truth and they don't do it. They don't have the eloquence, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So God takes it all. And so, you know what? Don't worry about it. Just go out there and do it. Know your stuff, be prepared, but
you remind me of something kind of funny. It just, if you guys read the story of Moses and how when God chose Moses and Moses is like, no, I'm not a very good speaker. He kept trying to get away from it. God's like, no, I'm going to use you, but I'm not very good.
No. Nope. Right.
So,
right. That's my
very good
experience. No thanks, God. No thanks. Come here, son. Nicely. But it was kind of a horse collar. I don't care what you think. I don't care what you feel. I don't care what your tongue does. Who made man's mouth, Bubba? Right. And so
exactly.
There's that wonderful aspect of God just breaking in and doing things. And to me, if there's life and breath in you, there's hope. God's not done with you. I mean, God is not done with, if you're still living and there's an inkling, as you said earlier, SJ, if there's an inkling of a mustard seed faith within you, God will take that. He hears you. He sees you. He knows that's there. He put it there, right? So press on, as Paul says. Forget what you did yesterday and press on, for God's glory. Philippians, press on.
Yeah,
for the joy.
Very good.
Doing it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on here, Daniel. I've really appreciated this conversation. If you guys haven't read his book yet, please go and buy The Story of the Cosmos, How the Heavens Declare the Glory of God. And so, great verse. And so, you guys, thank you for coming in here. Please like and subscribe and do come again. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. So I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast.